sophomore, if they were angling to make their child get into the best school that they could get them in. And that's not debated. But I'm amazed, and then I got married with amazed to see the Hispanic results when I think back of how many of my students were children of migrant farm families. And to see that kind of gains on children who aren't even in the class year is amazing to me.
Thank you. Barb.
Refresh my memory. Florida have state standards? I think they do.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So in the model you're talking about, would those standards apply to all schools that are in choice and levels? You understand that everybody be following that, and of course we're headed towards core standards, looking a little bit to the future. I mean, I want to see how that plays in what you're talking about.
Well, there's a number of ways you can do it because it's how the laws are structured. Charter schools typically do not have to follow all of the same regulations that other charter schools are public schools, but they don't have to follow because, as Susan said, a lot of the folks in the schools, and I'm sure you've heard it and maybe experienced some of it too in your time in the classroom, Barb, a lot of the regulations are pretty much nonsense. I mean, it's not really about educating the kids, and it might be well-intentioned, but it gets in the way. And so there are, especially when you're dealing with, because a lot of charter schools are designed to work on specific issues. They could be more like magnet schools, where they're attracting, going towards a certain, like engineering, or they can be dealing with some of the more troubled inner city, where you're dealing with, you've got issues in some of these school districts or neighborhoods that you might not have in some of the suburban issues. So those charter schools are set up with the same concept, though, of, look, we can set some of these rules aside. The point here is we're going to educate the kids, and we've got this plan of how to do it. So there's different ways you can do it. You can have it set up one way or the other. The most important part is to have parents and students have the choice. Yes?
You talk about us trying to find a silver bullet to improve schools, and you talk about how charter schools not being regulated as heavily find better ways to do things because the regulations get in the rules or get in the way. Why not look at all those regulations as a whole, and instead of trying to find a silver bullet, which the idea you're promoting could be considered a silver bullet in a way, why not look at the whole school system as a whole in Kansas and look for the ways that we could improve it one by one, rather than just trying to find one cure-all solution?
Well, that's a great question. We should do that. We should look at all those regulations and change the ones we can. Unfortunately, a lot of them are federal regulations. There's strings attached, and you don't have the option to change those things. We should do it both. But I wouldn't say that what we're talking about with school choice is a silver bullet. This is the first big step, but there's a lot of other steps. You need to do all the different options of school choice. You need to look at, including charter schools, where you can have less regulation. And in some cases, in some of the private schools, depending on how the laws are set up, they're not subject to a lot of the same bureaucratic rules, where people have more options to customize the educational process. But you need to look at alternate certification. You need to look at, I mean, some of these things are really beneficial. I mean, we tend to focus in Wichita on the urban areas, but in some of the rural areas, it's really hard to get qualified teachers. I mean, you've got a population issue. Looking at alternative teacher certification, rewarding teachers and attracting, one of the, we have the one-size-fits-all compensation system in Kansas for teachers. One of the things I showed you briefly, the Kansas OpenGov site, we have a few district payrolls on there. It was astounding when we were putting that together to learn that in several of the districts we saw the phys ed teacher has the highest compensation. And that's simply because it's longest time in seat. It has nothing to do with, and it's not that that's not a valuable position or that teacher might not be a good phys ed teacher, but we have a real need for science and math and technology teachers, and we don't have a means, the school board doesn't, the way that's set up is with the laws, everybody makes the same. And sometimes when you have to make some of the tough choices that some districts are making now, it's some of the best, brightest, most valuable teachers they have to let go because of the way the rules operate. Some of these other districts, you know, if you're dealing with school choice, you don't have to deal with that. We should change those things as well. This is not a silver bullet. This is a let's do it all. In fact, what we're doing right now in Kansas, the Just Spend More, that's a single focus. That's a silver bullet that's proven not to work. Kathy?
Maybe you could discuss how these vouchers will work for disabled students. There aren't a lot of schools out there waiting for disabled students to come in with a voucher, and they need very specialized teaching. How do they implement that?
Well, first, that's a great question. It's a multi-part answer. First of all, it's not just schools, because if you have a voucher for special needs, and again, it depends on how the law is written, but you don't just have to go to another school district. That's one option. You could go to a private school that offers it. You could go to a private vendor that might not be, there's a lot of different ways that options that you have. But also, because when you're in a state that has no school choice to speak of, then of course those options aren't going to exist. There's no economic basis for someone to start it up why open a business that no one's allowed to come to? So if you have,
this will
it's kind of a if you build it, they will come.
Yeah, this will spark special ed teachers banding together and starting their own school.
Or it might spark a group of parents or businesses getting together and say, let's have a charter school that is focused on special needs kids. In fact, there was you look at some of the, we have to remember that there's a lot of different sized school districts in Kansas. Oxford, for example, has 300 students. I was up in Osage County a couple of weeks ago. 350. Okay, I'm sorry, they grew.
I let it go once.
Okay, good for you. 350. Osage County has 4 school districts with 3,600 students. So there you have 4 school districts trying to provide in their own district, and they'll form some cooperatives and they'll try to do the best they can. But they're trying to with a very small district, provide services. If you have the ability to form charter schools, or if parents have the ability to go somewhere else to a private option to get that, it not only benefits those kids who have that option to go there. I've heard lots of testimony and talked to a lot of different folks around the state who say that it's a challenge on the other kids in the classroom when teachers are having to deal with some of the special needs issues. There's everybody suffering when you're trying to do something. You're trying to make all these balancing acts. So if there are options where you can have kids, whether they're low income or they have behavior issues or they have disability issues, you have options for those kids to get the special services they need, even if it's not in a public school. Everybody benefits from that. You've got better learning environments everywhere.
But if I could just piggyback on that.
Sure.
You're saying, but that doesn't exist right now. I think a lot of people think that, maybe you can explain how this voucher works. If all of a sudden there were vouchers and I have a child in 4th grade, does that mean I can take that voucher and get that child regardless of his needs or abilities into collegiate or independent?
That depends on how the law is written, but let me give you an example. The tax credit scholarship that was proposed this year in the legislature and didn't go anywhere very far was designed for, it had a formula for income. So it was up to, and I forget what the actual numbers were, but anybody below a certain income level would be eligible for this tax credit scholarship. And there was limits on the dollar amounts, so it was less than what the state would have spent otherwise. So yes, if this had passed and you were in that income group, individuals and businesses can donate money to a nonprofit organization that would distribute scholarships. So you would, if you were under that income level, then you and your child could apply for a scholarship from the scholarship granting organization. And then you could take that scholarship, if you were given one, anywhere you wanted to go. You could take it to collegiate, you could take it to a Catholic school, you could take it to a Lutheran school, you could do whatever you wanted with that. That's up to you.
And the school would have to take my child.
Which,
Well,
oh, well, of course, if you go, I mean, you know, if you're going to go to, let's say collegiate, I mean, there's still an application process you'd have to go to. Sure, I mean, it's any school, if you're trying to, it's going to depend on, do they have space? Oh, public schools? Sure.
Well, no, I guess that's the question is, if these things don't exist, especially for special needs kids, how does, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how that works on a practical level. If the voucher exists, does it really exist if it can't get you in anywhere?
Sure. You have to start, you have to let, there's going to be a little bit of a time lag probably. Oklahoma, a great place to talk to would be Oklahoma. They just started this a year ago, and they're expanding their school choice options. It's not like you wave a wand, you pass a law, and everything's great. But nothing changes. That's the one thing you can guarantee. There's all this speculation about what if. The one thing that's absolutely guaranteed is if we don't change, nothing else will change. So you have to start somewhere. And yeah, there's going to be some time. And there's going to have to be some thought go into this. But you don't wait until you have it all. You get out there and do it. And make it available. And you start sending that signal to the entrepreneurial world, especially here in Kansas, where we're kind of known for that. And you see what comes from it. And then you'll start looking around at other states that have done this. And you get some expectations from it. But it doesn't happen overnight. But it has to start sometime.
We do have a large and diverse state, and how does this work in the rural areas where there are no options except a public school, perhaps one public school per county? There's all kinds of aspects to school choice. One of the ones that benefits rural areas the most is expanding virtual learning, where they're going to have access to much more expertise, teachers and subjects and so forth. But again, there may not be anything else right now, but typically there may be some parochial schools. So there are some other options. There may be options that spring up. Rural areas especially would benefit from a full-blown expansion of virtual learning. That sounds important. Breaking news.
We have
Bob.
in Kansas what's commonly called a Blaine Amendment in our Constitution, which
Mhm.
I think prohibits the use of state tax dollars to be spent on religious schools, something like that. Is that an obstacle towards?
No, it's not. We've had a number of scholars look at that. And first of all, it is a Blaine Amendment. It's kind of the colloquial name for it. It doesn't prohibit spending money on parochial schools. What those amendments say is that you cannot use taxpayer money to support the organization. So and I'm paraphrasing that, but if you're not giving the money to the parochial school, you're giving the tax credit scholarship or the voucher to the parent. So the state isn't doing it. And I mean, there's been a lot of, in Kansas, I mean, some states have some pretty strict Blaine amendments that are hard to get around. Kansas is not one of them. We've had a number of scholars look at that. I mean, this is, and that subject came up, I think, in that tax credit scholarship debate. This is not a problem because it's the parent is deciding where to go with that. Because we need to start we need to start looking at things differently. We have to start saying this is not acceptable where we are. We can do better. And don't look at this as pointing fingers and trying to assess blame and who did. That's not what this is about. It can't be about that. We have to resist that temptation and say, what can we do differently? We've given it our best shot at what we have up to this point, and it's gotten us to where we are. And only if that is acceptable, and I think we can all agree that these numbers we're looking at are not acceptable, what else can we do? What other options can we look at so that every kid, not just most, but every kid, gets an effective education. Thanks for your time today.
Just a kind of a follow-up. We had, last November, I think it was, the Kansas Policy Institute had a speaker from the National Council on Teacher Quality who was quite critical of Kansas's policies towards teacher quality and effectiveness. Her thesis was many of these policies are implemented at the state level. We're just finishing a session of the Kansas legislature. Was any progress made this year on these policies about teacher quality in Kansas?
No. None.